Much like her legendary older brother Michael Jackson, Janet Jackson is a global superstar in every sense of the word. Even today, she stands as a living icon, gifted, stunning, and someone who genuinely changed the landscape of music and entertainment. But as we've seen time and time again in this industry, fame and beauty offer no guarantees when it comes to love. Her romantic history is a long and winding one. It began with James DeBarge, whom she married in 1984. That union lasted roughly a year before it was over. Then came Renee Elizondo Jr., and this one is fascinating because virtually nobody knew it was happening. Renee was a dancer, songwriter, and director who quietly co-wrote a number of her biggest hits. The relationship was so private that the public didn't even find out they had been married until he filed for divorce in 2000. Janet had managed to keep an entire marriage out of the spotlight for years. Now we move into a stretch of time that a lot of people remember well. In the early 2000s, Janet Jackson entered into a relationship with legendary Atlanta producer Jermaine Dupri, and this one was different. Janet has always been an intensely private person, but this relationship played out with a visibility that was hard to miss. For 7 years, the two were one of the most talked-about power couples in the music industry. They never married, but the connection was real and long-lasting. Then, eventually, it ended. Now, hold on. Before we move forward, let's come back to this for a second. Because a lot of people put Jermaine Dupri on blast for supposedly letting Janet Jackson slip through his fingers. You hear it constantly. How did he fumble that? And look, this kind of conversation happens whenever a high-profile relationship ends and one person is seen as having had everything within reach. You saw the same reaction with Devon Franklin and Megan Good. Same thing with Klay Thompson and Megan Thee Stallion. But Jermaine Dupri actually addressed this directly. He sat down on a podcast and gave his side of the story, and what he had to say changes the framing.
Okay, don't judge me. I thought you guys were great together. Do you also feel like that was a fumble? Because I feel like it was a fumble. I wanted you guys to last.
And nobody expected this response.
I be trying to figure out why y'all don't ever say she fumbled me.
Jermaine Dupri's response was simple and direct. He flipped the entire question around and said, "How do you know she didn't fumble me?" That line landed like a grenade. People were heated. The general reaction was disbelief. How dare he position himself as the one who got away when we're talking about Janet Jackson? It stirred up a lot of noise. But here's where the story takes a genuinely interesting turn. By 2012, Janet had moved on, in a direction that surprised a lot of people. She married Wissam Almana, a Qatari billionaire businessman with serious wealth and global influence. This was a significant shift, not just in terms of who she was with, but in terms of how she was living. She stepped back from the entertainment industry almost entirely. She relocated and spent a considerable amount of time in the Middle East, fully immersing herself in that world. And the changes went beyond geography. Photos began circulating of Janet dressed in modest, conservative clothing, a dramatic departure from the image the world had known for decades. She was visibly adapting to a different cultural and religious environment, presenting herself in a way that reflected the expectations of her new life. To a lot of people watching from the outside, it looked like Janet Jackson, one of the most iconic and independent women in music history, had quietly stepped into the role of a
Qatari billionaire with some Almana, and their marriage had a prenup that had 2 clauses. One, she would get $100 million if the marriage lasted at least 5 years. 2, she would get $100 million if she gave the tycoon an heir. So, in 2016, at 49, she got pregnant, and she gave birth in 2017, the year they completed 5 years of marriage. And so our girl got $200 million upon completion.
Oh, and we almost forgot to mention one crucial detail. Janet walked away from that marriage with a reported $200 million. She stayed 5 years, had his child, son Isa Almana, and then once that chapter was complete, she packed up and headed straight back to the United States. Just like that. Now, if you were Wissam Almana in that moment, the math had to sting. By some estimates, that works out to roughly $40 million per year. And at the end of it, He had neither the money nor the woman. That's a tough position to be in, regardless of how many billions you're sitting on. But let's circle back to the Jermaine Dupri conversation for a second, because his argument was that Janet fumbled him, not the other way around. And if you look at what she went and did next, securing a billionaire and walking away with a fortune that dwarfs anything in Dupri's financial universe, it's hard to argue that she came out on the losing end of anything. By that measure, she absolutely leveled up. Jermaine's point, ironically, may have proven itself in ways he didn't anticipate. The real question, though, is what happened after she returned to the States with all of that? And the answer, at least publicly, is not much. There was brief buzz around actor Matthew McConaughey, who confirmed in 2019 that the two had gone on a handful of dates back in the early 2000s after crossing paths at the Grammys. But nothing ever developed beyond that. Then came speculation about Q-Tip, which both parties essentially dismissed as a friendship and nothing more. So at this point in the story, Janet Jackson, iconic, wealthy, and very much available, appears to be out here.
Thing is, I don't really know if they're together or not, but I do not ever see Janet Jackson hold a lot of people's hands. So when she holding somebody's hand, I know something is going on.
So Maxwell turned out to be just a friend too. At this point, Janet Jackson, fresh off walking away from a Qatari billionaire with a reported $200 million, seemingly cannot find her footing romantically back home, which, when you think about it, is its own kind of story. Then February rolls around, and something catches people's attention. Janet shows up at Savior's Day, the annual Nation of Islam convention. Now, that's notable on its own. Janet didn't grow up Muslim. She was raised as a Jehovah's Witness. She did convert to Islam during her marriage to Wissam Al-Mana, which made sense given the relationship and the environment she was living in at the time. But the marriage is over, so her continued connection to Islam suggests it wasn't just a gesture for the relationship. She may have genuinely held on to the faith. What really got people talking, though, was who she was seen with. Photos and sightings started surfacing of Janet spending time with Mustafa Farrakhan, the son of Nation of Islam leader Louis Farrakhan. The blogs picked it up quickly, and before long the speculation turned into reports that the two were actually a couple. Here's what makes this interesting. Mustafa Farrakhan is around 60 years old, roughly the same age as Janet, and by multiple accounts, the two have been close for years, long-standing friends by most descriptions. But that raises a question worth sitting with. If they've genuinely been close all this time, why now? She could have explored that connection back in the 90s. She could have turned in that direction between Renee Elizondo and Jermaine Dupri. She could have considered him when she was going on casual dates with Matthew McConaughey. There were windows, multiple windows. But it's happening now, and you already know where this is heading. The options that were once available to Janet Jackson have narrowed. That's not an attack. It's just the reality of
Expectations for him.
I want vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
I want honesty. We have to have sex at least 5 days a week. Minimum.
They're saying this.
I don't really care about money like that, but I still want to keep it like exciting.
Right.
You know, I want it to be like, hey, I'm coming to pick you up. Let's go to Wendy's. I don't give a shit where we
Wendy's?
go. I don't give a shit where we go. I don't
Wow.
care where we go.
So you're not like I
I'll
gotta
sit
go
in
to
the
Nobu.
not like Nobu, but like I'm down for Wendy's too.
Oh,
And I'll
okay.
sit in the car with you and we'll eat
Right.
Wendy's together and talk shit and listen to slow jams and then go home.
Notice what's missing from the conversation now. Nobody's talking about financial requirements anymore, and there's a reason for that. The window for attracting serious wealth has closed for a lot of these women, not because they aren't beautiful or accomplished, but because their track record has become part of the equation. The men with real money have done the math, and they're not interested in repeating someone else's expensive lesson. That's exactly the position Janet Jackson finds herself in right now. And yes, someone could make the argument that maybe she doesn't want a partner, maybe marriage isn't on her radar. That's a fair point to raise. But if we're being honest about what we're observing, Mustafa Farrakhan is not in Janet Jackson's financial universe. Louis Farrakhan, his father, may be comfortable, but wealthy by any serious standard, he is not, which means Mustafa almost certainly isn't either. What we're watching, whether people want to name it or not, is Janet Jackson dating down as she approaches her 60s. And that's not a judgment. It's a pattern that plays out across the board as people age. Here's the reality that applies to everyone. The older you get, the less tolerance people have for unresolved baggage. That's not gender specific. I'm in my 40s. If I'm pursuing someone significantly younger, I cannot afford to make the same careless mistakes a 25-year-old can make. At this stage, you're supposed to be the solution in someone's life, not an additional problem they have to manage. The challenge is that some women, as they get older and become more anchored in their own perspective, can lose sight of what the other person actually needs from a partnership. And when that awareness isn't there, the options shrink quietly, consistently. Look at what's happening with Stephon Diggs and Cardi B right now. A lot of people are saying she deserves better, but does she? The men who are paying attention, the ones who understand her public history and the chaos that tends to surround her situation, aren't lining up, not because she isn't attractive, but because the risk calculation doesn't work in their favor. Nobody with real options wants to walk into that kind of exposure. And that's the brutal truth about getting older in the dating market. Past a certain age, mid-30s, 40 and beyond, people stop extending grace for patterns that should have been outgrown. You have to show up differently. Janet Jackson isn't exempt from that. Neither am I. Neither is anyone. So when the